It was supposed to be a quiet drive home. Just a couple heading back from a Sunday dinner with old friends, the radio humming softly, headlights cutting through the empty backroads of Linden County, Georgia. But that peaceful silence shattered when Deputy Cole Brantley's cruiser flicked on its lights and siren behind them. Inside the car, Elias Monroe, a retired legal consultant, glanced at his wife Naomi. Neither of them had been speeding. The tank was full. The registration was current. Still, Elias carefully pulled over to the gravel shoulder beneath a flickering street lamp. Deputy Brantley approached with a slow, swaggering gait. His hand hovered near his belt. "Evenin'. You got a busted tail light back here," he muttered without making eye contact. Behind him, another officer, Deputy Trevor Lyle, stood with arms folded, watching from the passenger side mirror like a silent enforcer. Elias knew his car like he knew the back of his hand. It was a 2019 Buick in mint condition, passed down from his late brother. The tail lights had been checked just last week. He looked calmly at the deputy and asked, "Sir, are you certain about that? I wasn't aware of any issue." That question alone seemed to ignite something in Brantley. "You questioning me?" he snapped, leaning in closer now. "Just step out of the vehicle, sir." Naomi tensed, her fingers wrapping instinctively around her husband's arm. She had seen how these things played out before, on the news, in family stories, in the whispers of church members who'd had their own run-ins. But Elias didn't shout. He didn't resist. He simply asked another question, his voice even, grounded. "Deputy, may I ask under what authority you're requesting I exit my vehicle?" The second officer stepped forward now, more agitated than before. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," Lyle said, tapping the flashlight against the window like a threat wrapped in politeness. The air was thick with tension. And yet, inside the car, Elias Monroe was calm, like a man who'd spent years training himself to stay composed even when the walls were closing in. He reached slowly for his wallet and offered his license. "I'm not trying to escalate," he said. "But I do know my rights." The deputies didn't care. They didn't check the light. They didn't radio anything in. Instead, they exchanged glances, their body language smug and sure. And just like that, a routine evening turned into something else, an opening chapter in a battle Elias never asked for, but was more than ready to fight. The road was still. The only sound was the distant chirp of crickets and the low murmur of Naomi's nervous breath. Elias sat behind the wheel of the parked Buick, hands steady on the steering wheel, the stinging red and blue strobe of the deputy's cruiser casting sharp shadows across his face. "Step out of the vehicle," Deputy Brantley repeated, louder this time, voice bristling with forced authority. Elias didn't move right away. Not because of fear, but because he knew the law. "Deputy," he said, measured and clear, "I'm not resisting. But I'd like to know why I'm being asked to step out." "There's no probable cause here. You haven't cited any suspicious behavior or observed any illegal activity." Brantley leaned in, jaw tight, nostrils flaring. "We don't need a damn lecture. I said out." In the corner of his eye, Elias saw Naomi's hand trembling on her lap. She said nothing, but he could feel the questions running through her. Why this? Why now? Why us? With a slow exhale, Elias unbuckled his seatbelt. "For the record," he said, "I am stepping out under verbal duress. This is not voluntary." Brantley pulled the door open before Elias could even fully finish the sentence. "Don't get cute with me," he snapped. "Out." Elias stepped onto the loose gravel, his brown loafers crunching against the shoulder of the road. He stood straight, all 6 feet of him, a calm presence beneath the sheriff's department spotlight. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like someone's grandfather. Someone's former Sunday school teacher. A man who had written legal briefs by candlelight during civil rights cases in the 1970s. But to them, in this moment, he was just another suspect. Deputy Lyle walked over and began circling the Buick like a hungry hawk. "Pop the trunk," he said casually. Naomi leaned forward. "Excuse me?" she asked. "You haven't even explained the stop, now you're asking to search the car." Brantley ignored her. "Trunk," he repeated. Elias folded his arms. "You have no warrant. No probable cause. This is an unlawful search, and I do not consent." Brantley grinned. "Look at that, law school over here." Lyle chuckled under his breath. "Yeah, we got us a smart mouth tonight." Naomi, ever the peacemaker, gently opened her purse and pulled out her phone. She held it up, screen facing out. "This is being recorded." Brantley's smile faltered, but only slightly. "Ma'am, you do that," he said. "We got nothing to hide." But that was a lie, and Elias knew it. Lyle patted down Elias roughly, checking pockets and waistband as if expecting contraband. "Just routine," he muttered, clearly relishing the authority. When the search turned up nothing, Brantley walked back to his cruiser, scribbled on a clipboard, and returned with a citation. "Faulty tail light and failure to comply," he said, slapping the paper against Elias's chest. Elias didn't even flinch. He took the citation with slow hands, looked it over, and said nothing. Naomi had already taken a picture of both deputies, badge numbers visible. "Would you mind identifying yourselves for the record?" she asked, voice surprisingly steady. Neither deputy answered. Instead, Brantley said, "You people always think you're above the rules." Elias raised his eyes. "No," he said. "I just know what the rules actually are." They got back into the Buick in silence. Elias didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, breathing through his nose, calming his pulse, his eyes fixed on the dashboard. Naomi reached for his hand. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," he said softly. "But I won't let this sit." Back at home, notes, not rage. By the time they pulled into their driveway, the clock had struck 11:08 p.m. The porch light flickered on automatically. Naomi walked straight to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, then leaned against the counter watching her husband. Elias moved through the house with deliberate grace. He went to his study, lined with dusty books, framed certificates, and faded legal pads stacked neatly on the bookshelf. He pulled down a leather-bound notebook. Its spine was worn, edges dog-eared, corners curled from use. It was the same notebook he had taken to every trial, every mediation, every hearing. Not because he didn't trust memory, but because he believed in documentation. Date, August 12, 10:14 p.m. Stop on Route 17. Officers Brantley and Lyle, he wrote, printing slowly in block letters. He logged the interaction detail by detail, the language they used, the illegal search, the mocking tone, the fabricated charge. Naomi entered, holding her phone. "I looked them up," she said. "Lyle has a badge number tied to 2 citizen complaints last year. Excessive force. Brantley's name's been in the papers before. They're not rookies, they know what they're doing." Elias nodded. "Then we're going to do what I know how to do." She disappeared into the hall and returned moments later with a dusty mahogany nameplate. She set it down on the desk gently, Naomi S. Monroe, Judge, Superior Court, retired. "This isn't just about a broken tail light," she said. "They think they can bully people who don't know how to fight back." Elias smiled faintly. "Well," he said, tapping the pen against his notebook, "they picked the wrong two." The legal mind awakes. Over the next few days, Elias and Naomi worked like clockwork. They weren't loud. They weren't seeking revenge. They were gathering facts. Elias called in a favor to Raina Madison, an old colleague who now worked in internal affairs at the State Department of Justice. "I need you to pull complaint records for Deputies Brantley and Lyle, if you can," he asked during the call. There was a long pause on the other end. "Elias," Raina said. That's a can of worms. I need the worms. Within 24 hours, she emailed back. 4 separate complaints against Brantley in the last 3 years. 2 of them internally resolved. 1 reprimand, sealed. 1 still pending. Lyle had 3, ranging from intimidation to harassment during a traffic stop. Elias added the names, dates, and incidents to his notebook. Naomi worked on filing a formal complaint, not with the sheriff's office, but with the Civilian Review Board and Internal Affairs Division. They collected video footage from the scene. Dash cam data, still photographs of their fully functioning tail lights taken the very next morning. They got witness testimony from a neighbor who saw the Buick's tail lights before they left for dinner. They were building not a story, but a case. A promise, not a vendetta. On a quiet Thursday night, Naomi sat beside Elias on their screened-in porch, looking up at the stars. "You sure you want to go through all this?" she asked. "You're retired. You don't have to be the crusader anymore." He leaned back in his chair. "I'm not doing it for me," he said. "I'm doing it for the next man who gets pulled over and doesn't know how to say no. For the next woman who doesn't have a judge's nameplate sitting in her attic." Naomi nodded slowly. "Then we do it together." The soft rustle of papers, the quiet hum of an old desk lamp, and the scent of strong coffee filled the Monroe home that evening. Elias sat at the kitchen table, his reading glasses slipping slightly down his nose, his fingers moving with practiced rhythm across his old mechanical typewriter. It was almost midnight, and Naomi had just returned from the spare bedroom, her arms full of boxes. She placed them gently on the table beside him. "These are from your old files," she said. "Back when you were still practicing." Elias smiled faintly. "Never thought I'd need these again." The boxes were filled with templates, case notes, references to constitutional law, and, most importantly, previous Section 1983 filings. The very foundation for what Elias planned to pursue. Section 1983, Elias murmured to himself, as if reacquainting with an old ally. The shield we carry when everything else fails. A paper trail with purpose. The next morning, Elias drafted the first version of his federal complaint. Each word was typed with care, each citation carefully placed. This is not about revenge. This is about remedy. The filing alleged violations of the 4th and 14th Amendments, protection from unlawful search and seizure, and the right to equal protection under the law. Elias backed it up with photo evidence of the car's intact tail lights, the audio Naomi captured during the stop, and a notarized affidavit detailing the incident from both of them. But Elias knew that wasn't enough. "One complaint won't shake the system," he said to Naomi over breakfast. "We need to show this wasn't an isolated incident. We need a pattern." That's when Naomi called Raina Madison again. "Raina," she asked, "how many people have filed complaints against these 2 in the last 5 years?" Raina paused before answering. "On record? 6. Off record? More than a dozen, but they were dismissed quietly. Most folks didn't have the means, or the energy, to push back." Naomi set her coffee down slowly. "Can you connect us with anyone who's willing to speak?" The victims who didn't fight back. Over the next week, the Monroes met with 3 other Linden County residents, all of whom had stories eerily similar to theirs. Angela Ricks, a single mother who had been pulled over and held for over an hour because her plates looked suspicious. She filed a complaint but never heard back. William Carter, a Vietnam veteran with a prosthetic leg, who was slammed against his own pickup truck because he didn't move fast enough. Leona Vasquez, a school librarian, stopped on her way home from a book club and forced to sit on the curb while deputies searched her car without explanation. Each had filed paperwork. Each had received silence in return. Elias documented their statements, attached their complaints as exhibits, and included them as part of his legal brief. "This is bigger than just us," Naomi said one evening. "This is systemic." Elias nodded. Which is why we take it to federal court. Filing day. It was a humid Tuesday when Elias dressed in his old Navy blazer, the one he hadn't worn since retirement, and stepped into the Middle District Federal Courthouse in Atlanta. Naomi walked beside him, files in hand, her demeanor sharp and calm. The clerk at the front desk barely looked up until Elias set down the binder. Civil complaint under 42 U.S.C. Section 1983, he said. Filed by Elias and Naomi Monroe. We're representing ourselves. The clerk raised an eyebrow. Pro se. Yes, Elias replied. But not uninformed. Within the hour, the case was assigned a docket number, Monroe v. Brantley et al. A federal judge was assigned. Summons were prepared. A case that began on a dark roadside in Linden County was now entering the halls of federal justice. The sheriff's office reacts back in Linden County. The ripple was immediate. Sheriff Claiborne Reese, a good boy politician who had held the office for over a decade, summoned Brantley and Lyle into his office. The walls were covered in taxidermied deer heads and framed photos of handshakes with governors. You boys want to explain why I'm getting calls from the district court? He asked, teeth clenched. Brantley leaned back in his chair, unconcerned. It's just a bluff, Sheriff. Some old-timer and his wife. They won't get far. Reese wasn't so sure. That old-timer's a retired legal consultant. His wife used to wear a judge's robe. And from what I hear, they've got receipts. He tapped a manila folder on his desk. Inside were copies of past complaints, now resurfacing because of Elias's filings. This ain't going away, Reese muttered. But rather than investigate his own department, the sheriff told the deputies to lay low and stay off the road for a while. It wasn't justice. It was damage control. Building the case while the sheriff tried to contain the fallout, Elias and Naomi kept working. They filed Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, requests for internal affairs documents, body cam footage, and departmental communications. When some requests were denied, Elias filed motions to compel, and won. Their home turned into a war room. The dining table was now covered in printouts and highlighted transcripts. Naomi drafted timelines and annotated each interaction. Elias reviewed federal case law and identified precedents where similar abuses were punished with financial damages and disciplinary action. One evening, Naomi asked, "Do you think this judge will listen?" "Really listen?" Elias leaned back, eyes weary but alive. "I don't need them to listen to my voice. I need them to read the truth." The call that changed everything. A few days before the preliminary hearing, Elias received a call from an unexpected number. "Mr. Monroe?" the voice on the other end asked. "This is Rachel Kim, civil rights attorney with the Southern Legal Defense Union. We've read your filing. And we'd like to offer assistance, pro bono." Elias hesitated. "I appreciate the offer, Ms. Kim, but I filed this myself intentionally." "I understand," she said. "And what you're doing is incredible. But the court listens more when pressure builds from multiple sides. You're not just standing up for yourselves. You've started something bigger." Elias turned to Naomi, who gave a small nod. He picked up the phone again. "All right. Let's talk." A bigger fight ahead with the SLDU now backing them as amicus curiae. The Monroe's case gained new media attention. Reporters began circling. Local news anchors requested interviews. Elias and Naomi turned most of them down. But they did speak with a quiet, respectful journalist from the Atlanta Tribune, who had covered civil rights stories for decades. Their story ran with the headline, "Justice, Delayed but Not Denied, Linden Couple Takes on Sheriff's Department." The article quoted Elias, "This isn't about punishing bad men. It's about changing a broken system, so no one else has to learn the law after it's too late." End of Part 3. Preview. The case was now public. The complaint was filed. The community was watching. In their small town, some people praised the Monroes for their bravery. Others whispered behind closed doors, fearful of change and uncomfortable with confrontation. But none of that mattered to Elias and Naomi. They weren't seeking approval. They were seeking truth. And for the first time in a long time, the system was being asked to answer. Whispers in Linden County. It began with whispers. A few townsfolk exchanging nervous glances in the aisles of the local grocery store. Some offered cautious nods when Naomi passed by at the bank, while others quickly turned their eyes away. Elias, stopping by the barbershop one morning, was met with silence as he walked in, until old Mr. Lawton finally said, "Heard you're taking them boys to court." Elias simply nodded. "I'm taking the truth to court," he said. "Where it belongs." Linden County had seen lawsuits before, sure. But never like this, never against their own sheriff's department. Never from someone like Elias Monroe. Inside the sheriff's office, panic in uniform behind the paneled doors of the sheriff's office, the mood had shifted from swagger to strategy. Sheriff Claiborne Reese wasn't worried about right or wrong, he was worried about headlines, re-election, and damage to the brand he'd carefully cultivated over 15 years. "We can't afford a federal ruling," he muttered to his internal legal counsel, a wiry man named Graham Tate with bags under his eyes and a talent for burying problems before they reached the press. Tate laid out the situation in a few curt sentences. "The evidence is clean. They've got photos, recordings, sworn affidavits, and multiple victims of prior incidents. And now the Southern Legal Defense Union is watching from the sidelines." "Brantley and Lyle?" Reese asked. Tate sighed. "If they take the stand, they'll sink this department." Reese slammed his fist onto the table. "So what do we do?" "We get ahead of it. Offer settlement. Quietly. No admission of guilt." A knock at the door. Elias and Naomi were in the middle of preparing their outline for the preliminary hearing when a knock came at the door. Standing outside was a young man in a dark suit, holding a slim black folder and a neutral expression. He introduced himself as Asher Locke, representing the county's risk management department. "I've been authorized to propose a resolution," he began, placing the folder gently on their kitchen table. Inside was a typed letter offering $35,000 in damages, the dismissal of the citation, and a signed confidentiality agreement. No apology. No accountability. Just money for silence. Elias didn't even blink. "Tell Sheriff Reese," he said, "that we're not interested in hush money." Asher remained professional. "Mr. Monroe, if this goes to court, the cost, emotionally and financially, could be much higher." Naomi stood, her voice firm. "Then they should have thought about that before they decided to treat us like suspects instead of citizens." Locke collected the folder, nodded, and left without a word. The community reacts. The Tribune story had spread far beyond Linden. Regional outlets picked it up. A podcast on civil liberties featured Elias's voice reading from his court filing. Even local radio stations buzzed about the couple who dared to take on their own sheriff's department. Some in the town were inspired. Others were uncomfortable. A few were hostile. One morning, Naomi found a flyer tucked into their mailbox that read, "You're either with us or with the criminals. Back the badge." Elias placed it in a plastic sleeve and filed it with the rest of their evidence. "Let's show the judge how intimidation really works," he said. That same afternoon, their pastor stopped by. Reverend Miles, a man with kind eyes and an old Bible under his arm, offered quiet prayers and cautious encouragement. "I don't know what God's plan is for all this," he said, "but I do believe He put the law in your heart for a reason." Inside the war room as the hearing date approached, Elias and Naomi doubled down. They practiced statements out loud. Elias fine-tuned every sentence of their opening remarks. Naomi rehearsed timelines, victim testimony, and visual aids. With help from the legal team at the SLDU, they submitted motions to subpoena internal disciplinary records, compel the release of body cam footage, and enter the community complaints into the court record. One evening, while sorting documents on the kitchen table, Naomi paused over a letter from Angela Ricks, one of the earlier victims. "She said something powerful," Naomi murmured. "I didn't know how to fight until I saw you two stand up." Elias looked over his reading glasses. "Then we have to win. For all of them." Deputies under pressure. Meanwhile, Deputies Brantley and Lyle were under internal review. They'd been taken off patrol duty and reassigned to administrative work, which mostly meant stacking boxes in the evidence room and avoiding reporters. Lyle was cracking. "You think they're really gonna fire us?" he asked Brantley one afternoon. Brantley scoffed. "No way. Sheriff's got our back." But deep down, even Brantley could feel it, the old system wasn't holding the way it used to. Public opinion was shifting. The internet had receipts. And Elias Monroe wasn't just some old man. They had underestimated him from the beginning. A surprise witness 3 days before the hearing, Elias received an unexpected email. Subject: "I saw what happened." It was from Jordan McNeil, a college student who'd been driving behind Elias the night of the stop. He recognized the couple's Buick from the news coverage and remembered thinking, "Why are they being pulled over? Their lights looked fine to me." Jordan agreed to testify. The Monroes met him for coffee the next day. Naomi brought her recorder, Elias brought a notepad. "What you're doing matters," Jordan said. "I'm studying criminal justice. I want to be one of the good ones. If my testimony helps, I'm in." They added his sworn affidavit to the evidence packet. The day before court, on the eve of the preliminary hearing, Elias and Naomi sat quietly on the porch. No more papers. No more prep. Just stillness, and cicadas humming in the summer dusk. "I'm not nervous," Naomi said. "But I'm heavy." "Do you know what I mean?" Elias nodded. "It's the weight of truth. It always feels heavier the night before it lands." She turned to him, smiling. "If they offer us $1 million tomorrow, you still saying no?" He smiled back. "Only if it comes with a handwritten apology from every badge in that building." She laughed. "Then I guess we're going to court." The courthouse steps. The next morning, they arrived at the courthouse just before 9 a.m. Dozens were already gathered. Some holding signs that read, "Dignity for all," others simply watching. A few wore Sheriff's Department t-shirts, arms crossed tight. But most were quiet observers, drawn by curiosity and conscience. Inside, reporters jostled in the back rows of the courtroom. Court officers whispered to one another. Sheriff Reese sat 2 rows behind his deputies, flanked by lawyers, his jaw tight. Elias adjusted his tie. Naomi opened their binder. They had come prepared. The gavel falls. Judge Lenora Kingsley, a no-nonsense woman with steel-gray hair and a reputation for fairness, entered the chamber at 9:15 a.m. sharp. Monroe vs. Brantley et al., case number 24, CV, 1937, the clerk announced. Elias stood. "Your Honor, my wife and I are representing ourselves." The judge gave a small nod. "Proceed when ready." Elias's voice was calm but clear. "We are not here today because we want to punish anyone. We are here because 2 law enforcement officers treated us not as citizens, but as threats, without cause, without justification, and without remorse." He introduced Naomi, then called forward Angela, William, Leona, and finally Jordan. One by one, they shared their stories. One by one, the courtroom fell into silence. Elias then held up a small, clear plastic bag containing the flyer that read, "Back the badge." "Even now," he said, "there are those trying to make us the villains. But we didn't create this fight. We were stopped, searched, and humiliated. And still, we did not shout. We took notes. We documented. And now we ask this court to simply see the truth. The judge's warning. After an hour of testimony and a short recess, Judge Kingsley addressed the courtroom. This matter will proceed to full hearing, she ruled. There is sufficient evidence to suggest a violation of constitutional rights, and the court finds that the plaintiffs have established cause under Section 1983. The deputies shifted in their seats. Judge Kingsley looked toward the defense table. Mr. Tate, you may want to advise your clients that future misconduct will not be tolerated, in or outside this courtroom. Then she looked to Elias and Naomi. And to the Monroes, you've made your case with grace. The law will do the rest. A courtroom charged with silence by the time Elias and Naomi Monroe stepped through the heavy double doors of the Middle District Federal Courthouse. Every seat in the gallery was filled. Rows of faces, some curious, some skeptical, many hopeful, turned toward them as they took their places at the plaintiff's table. This wasn't just a legal hearing anymore. It was a moment. It was Linden County on trial. Judge Lenora Kingsley presided from the bench, her gavel resting silently beside her like a waiting thunderclap. Reporters lined the back rows. A local sketch artist from the Atlanta Tribune poised her pencil over a blank canvas. A pastor from the Monroe's church sat in the front row, hands clasped tight in prayer. Elias opened his binder. Naomi reached for his hand. "You ready?" she whispered. "I was born ready for this," he replied. "They just didn't know it." Opening the battle, the defense opened with a sterile tone, delivered by the county's legal counsel, Graham Tate. He painted the deputies as professionals following standard procedure, minimizing the stop as a brief inconvenience, and framing the Monroe's lawsuit as overreaction fueled by emotion. But the room felt unmoved. Then Elias stood. He walked to the center of the courtroom, not fast, not slow. Just steady. He turned to the judge, then to the jury. His voice was deliberate, yet full of quiet power. "My wife and I were stopped, searched, and treated like criminals on a peaceful drive home. Not because we posed a threat. But because, in the eyes of two armed deputies, we didn't belong in our own story. We didn't yell. We didn't resist. We recorded. We remembered. We documented everything, because dignity isn't noise. It's knowing your rights, even when no one else wants to hear them." He paused and held up a photo. Taken the morning after the stop, clearly showing both tail lights in perfect working condition. "Does this look broken to you?" Witnesses speak the truth one by one. The Monroe's witnesses took the stand. First was Angela Ricks, whose voice trembled as she described being pulled over in front of her 6-year-old son and made to step out barefoot onto gravel. Then William Carter, the Vietnam vet with the prosthetic leg, rolled up his pants to show the bruises from when Deputy Lyle had slammed him against his truck door 2 years prior. Then came Leona Vasquez, the librarian, whose voice didn't tremble, but burned. They didn't see a woman in glasses. They saw a target. Finally, Jordan McNeil, the college student, described how he had driven behind the Monroes that night and saw no broken tail light. "It was just a regular car," he said. Until those flashing lights came on. Each story echoed the next. The courtroom sat in hushed awe as Naomi, seated beside Elias, scribbled notes and gave each witness a quiet nod of gratitude. Cross-examination and cracks. When it came time for cross-examination, the defense attorneys pushed back. They tried to trip up dates. Discredit memories. Cast doubt. But the witnesses held firm. Their voices didn't crack under pressure. Their eyes didn't wander. When Tate asked Jordan why he didn't call the sheriff's office that night if he thought the stop was wrong, Jordan answered, "Because I didn't think anyone would listen." But they're listening now, aren't they? Even Judge Kingsley allowed herself the faintest smile. Deputy Brantley takes the stand. It was time. Deputy Cole Brantley was called to testify. He took the stand in full uniform, freshly pressed. He sat up straight, answered with, "Yes, ma'am," and "No, ma'am." He played the part of the respectful officer. Elias approached with measured calm. Deputy Brantley, did you see a broken tail light on the Monroe vehicle? I believed I did, sir. You believed. Not confirmed. There was sufficient indication. Did you inspect the tail light before initiating the stop? Brantley hesitated. No, sir. Elias nodded. So it was a hunch. I wouldn't call it that. What would you call stopping two senior citizens, searching their vehicle without cause, and mocking them during the process? Brantley bristled. I don't recall mocking anyone. Naomi reached into their file and handed Elias a USB. We'd like to submit audio from the plaintiff's dash recording, Your Honor. Permission granted. The audio played. Brantley's voice crackled over the courtroom speakers. We got ourselves a smart-mouth old man, huh? The room fell silent. Brantley swallowed hard. Elias stepped back. No further questions. Lyle and the Breaking Point deputy Trevor Lyle fared no better. On the stand, he tried to deflect, claiming he only followed Brantley's lead and that he was just there to ensure safety. Elias leaned in during his cross. Deputy, do you believe safety is best ensured by illegally searching a retired couple's car on the side of a highway? I was just doing my job. Even if that job violates the Constitution. No further questions. Lyle's hands shook as he stepped down. Naomi's moment. Then Naomi Monroe stood. She didn't need a legal title to command the room. She was clarity wrapped in grace. I was raised to believe the law was a tool for fairness, she said. That's why I became a judge. But that night on the side of Route 17, I wasn't treated like someone who once wore a robe, I was treated like someone who didn't matter. She turned toward the jury. We didn't ask to be heroes. We just refused to be silent. Closing arguments. As the trial came to a close, Elias delivered his final argument. He spoke not with rage, but with resolve. We don't stand here today because we lost control. We stand here because we kept it. Because we documented what happened, remembered what mattered, and believed that even now, especially now, the law can still be a tool for truth. We're not asking for vengeance. We're asking for recognition. For restoration. And for this court to send a message, that no one, not even a badge, is above accountability. The day arrives. The courthouse was still that morning, eerily still. No shouting crowds. No swarming reporters. Just a low hush that hung in the marble halls like morning fog. Inside courtroom B, the air felt heavier than usual. Elias and Naomi Monroe sat side by side at the plaintiff's table, hands gently folded. They weren't dressed to impress. Just in navy and gray, the colors of calm, of quiet resolve. Their eyes didn't dart. They didn't fidget. After everything, they were simply steady. At 9:03 a.m., Judge Lenora Kingsley entered, her robe crisp, her steps firm. The courtroom rose. This court is now in session for Monroe v. Brantley, Lyle, and the Linden County Sheriff's Department, the clerk announced. The moment had arrived. A verdict years in the making. Judge Kingsley took her time. She adjusted her glasses, sorted through a small stack of notes, then looked out over the packed gallery. Her tone was clear, controlled, and filled with authority, not just from the bench, but from a deep understanding of justice. This case, at its heart, has been about dignity. About the balance of power between law enforcement and the people they serve. After careful review of all testimony, evidence, and legal precedent, this court finds in favor of the plaintiffs, Elias and Naomi Monroe. There was a gasp in the courtroom. Naomi closed her eyes briefly. Elias didn't move, he just exhaled. The court finds that Deputies Brantley and Lyle violated the plaintiff's constitutional rights under the 4th and 14th Amendments. Furthermore, this court finds that the Linden County Sheriff's Department failed in its duty to address repeated complaints of misconduct, fostering a culture of unchecked behavior. Kingsley paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Deputies Brantley and Lyle are hereby suspended from duty pending full departmental review and independent investigation. The sheriff's office is ordered to issue a formal, public apology to the plaintiffs. In addition, the court awards compensatory damages in the amount of $125,000, to be paid jointly by the deputies and the department. Whispers broke out like a ripple across the courtroom. Some were in disbelief. Others in quiet awe. But the Monroes? Still calm. Still composed. Justice, when it finally comes, doesn't always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes like this, measured, powerful, complete. The apology, or what passed for one. A few days later, Sheriff Claiborne Reese stood at a press podium in front of the Lyndon County Sheriff's Department. Reporters gathered like vultures, cameras flashing. The sheriff's statement was prepared, likely not by him, and read in a tone too smooth to feel sincere. The department acknowledges the federal court's decision and apologizes to Mr. and Mrs. Monroe for the treatment they endured. While we maintain pride in our officers' service, we also recognize the need to continually improve practices and transparency. We will cooperate fully with the investigation and review procedures. Elias and Naomi watched from their living room. "That's not an apology," Naomi said. "No," Elias replied. "But it's a beginning." Deputy Fallout Deputy Lyle resigned 3 days after the ruling. He gave no interview. Packed up his desk. Disappeared into anonymity. Deputy Brantley was placed on leave. His personnel file, once locked away behind bureaucratic red tape, was now the subject of a full audit by the State Attorney General's office. Internal memos leaked to the press showed a history of reprimands, complaints dismissed without investigation, and patterns of aggressive behavior. He was no longer protected. Not by silence. Not by the badge. Community awakening. Something shifted in Lyndon County. At the next town council meeting, more citizens showed up than ever before. They asked questions. Real questions. Why weren't prior complaints taken seriously? What changes were being made to prevent future abuse? How would oversight be implemented? Naomi spoke briefly at that meeting. She didn't demand. She didn't scold. She simply said, justice isn't just what happens in court. It's what happens next. Even longtime residents, folks who once called the Monroes troublemakers, in whispers, began seeing things differently. Change, as it turned out, didn't always wear signs or scream through megaphones. Sometimes it wore glasses, carried a notebook, and waited patiently for its moment. A visit from the next generation. A week after the verdict, a knock came at the Monroes' door. It was Jordan McNeil, the college student who had testified on their behalf. He brought flowers. A small notebook. And a letter of admission from Howard University Law School. "I wanted you both to see this," he said, eyes bright. "And I wanted to thank you." Naomi smiled. "You don't owe us thanks, Jordan." "I do," he replied. "Because of you, I stopped doubting my place in the system. I want to make sure other people don't get overlooked, like you almost did." Elias nodded, a rare crack of emotion in his voice. "Then go make us proud. But don't wait until you wear a suit to fight for someone. Start right where you are." Jordan nodded. "Yes, sir." The legacy grows. The story of Elias and Naomi Monroe didn't fade after the court ruling. If anything, it expanded. NPR picked up the case and ran a national segment titled, "Quiet Resistance, the Couple Who Sued for Their Rights, and Won." A local university offered Elias an honorary Doctor of Law degree. Naomi was invited to speak at a civil liberties conference in Atlanta, where she received a standing ovation before even reaching the microphone. Their mailbox filled with letters from strangers, some from California, others from Mississippi, and even one from a retired police chief in Michigan who wrote, "You reminded me of why I took the oath in the first place." Thank you for doing what I didn't have the courage to do. Sheriff Reese's days numbered. Sheriff Reese, once untouchable, now found himself under a very different kind of scrutiny. A grassroots petition launched calling for an independent oversight committee. When the next election cycle came, he faced not one but 3 challengers, each vowing reform, transparency, and community engagement. Reese's campaign ads tried to frame the lawsuit as a political stunt. But the people weren't buying it. Because now, they had seen what integrity looked like. And it didn't come from behind a badge. Quiet reflections. One evening, long after the headlines faded, Elias and Naomi sat on their back porch, sipping sweet tea under the starlit sky. The wind rustled the pine trees. A dog barked in the distance. Somewhere, a choir was rehearsing for Sunday service. I keep thinking about that night, Naomi said. How it started. How it felt. Elias looked at her. Do you regret it? She shook her head. Not a single moment. He smiled. Me neither. They didn't speak much more after that. They didn't need to. Final notes in the notebook. In the last pages of his legal notebook, Elias wrote in careful, unhurried script, justice may be slow, but when it comes, it leaves footprints. We did not set out to be warriors. We were simply 2 people who refused to forget. And in doing so, we reminded others to remember. He closed the book and slid it into the drawer beneath his desk, alongside other worn volumes filled with the wisdom of a lifetime spent defending rights others had tried to erase. 1 year later, the courthouse that once held tension in its walls now stood as a quiet monument to change. 1 year had passed since Judge Lenora Kingsley had ruled in favor of Elias and Naomi Monroe. The dust of headlines had long since settled, but what remained, what truly mattered, was how the story continued to ripple through Linden County. It didn't end with a verdict. It began with one change in uniform. For the first time in decades, the Linden County Sheriff's Department had a new face at the top. Sheriff Claiborne Reese was no longer in office. His bid for re-election failed in dramatic fashion, losing to Tamara Giles, a former federal investigator and Linden County native who had run on a platform of accountability, transparency, and respect. During her swearing-in, Tamara thanked the Monroes. Not by name, but by legacy. To the citizens who stood when others sat, who documented when others dismissed, you gave this county its moral compass back. Among her first acts in office was the establishment of an independent civilian review board. The board would evaluate all future complaints against law enforcement and ensure no voice went unheard again. The Academy program, a quiet conversation on the Monroe's back porch, led to something more. A mentorship program for young students interested in law, policy, and justice. They called it the Monroe Civic Academy, hosted quarterly at Linden Community College. Students from all walks of life gathered for weekend intensives, where they read landmark cases, held mock hearings, and learned how to write formal complaints and legal petitions. The message was simple: know your rights. Then use them. At the center of every session sat Elias's notebook. Now digitized and projected on screen, each margin note preserved like a handwritten gospel. Naomi taught a workshop titled, Grace Under Pressure, focused on de-escalation, dignity, and how to command a room without ever raising your voice. Their first student was Jordan McNeil, now in his 2nd year at Howard University School of Law. He returned every break to volunteer. One afternoon, after dismissing his breakout group, he stayed behind. You two could have walked away, he said. You could have taken the money and moved to the mountains. Naomi smiled. And miss all this? Elias chuckled. Some mountains are built right where you stand. You just have to help others climb them. A different kind of justice. In the town library, a small bronze plaque was placed on the wall above the civil rights section, in honor of Elias and Naomi Monroe for choosing justice over silence and leaving this town better than they found it. Some objected, saying it was too political. But most embraced it. Because for the first time, Linden County had a story it could tell with pride, one born not of conflict, but of courage. Angela Ricks finds her voice inspired by Naomi. Angela Ricks, the single mother who once trembled while recounting her wrongful stop, decided to run for a seat on the town school board. She had never held office, but she had something more powerful, conviction. During her campaign, she stood on a folding chair at the farmer's market and declared, "If we can change how justice is served, we can change how our children learn what justice is." She won by a landslide. At her first board meeting, she proposed adding a civic literacy and civil rights unit to the 11th grade curriculum. It passed unanimously. Letters from strangers. The Monroe's mailbox remained full, though not with flyers or threats. They received letters from across the country. A retired officer from Oklahoma wrote, "I learned from you how to listen again." A college student in Oregon said, "Your story stopped me from dropping out of law school." A grandmother in Pennsylvania wrote, "I showed your video to my church group. We cried. Then we prayed." Elias responded to every letter. He often ended them the same way, "May your words carry farther than your fear. And may your silence never be mistaken for surrender." Legacy in living color. One autumn afternoon, a documentary team arrived in Linden County. They'd heard about the case, the victory, and the transformation that followed. They interviewed residents, filmed inside the courthouse, and captured Naomi teaching a class on active citizenship. During a break in filming, the director asked Elias, "Do you see yourselves as activists?" Elias paused. "No. I see us as citizens who remembered we had the right to act." Naomi's health and hope. In the spring, Naomi began experiencing fatigue. Nothing serious, just the kind of exhaustion that follows a year of movement and meaning. Doctors confirmed it was mild hypertension, easily managed. But it was a reminder that their fight had taken a toll. Elias suggested they take time off. Maybe a vacation. Naomi laughed. "After all this? I'd miss the noise." Still, they cut back. Fewer speaking engagements. More evenings on the porch. More phone calls with their children and grandkids. But the academy went on. The students kept coming. And the notebooks kept filling. Epilogue, a speech that mattered. On the one-year anniversary of their victory, the Monroes were invited to speak at a state conference on legal advocacy. They took the stage to a standing ovation. Elias, always composed, adjusted the mic. "We live in a country where freedom doesn't walk, it limps. But when we remember who we are, when we insist that even small wrongs deserve big attention, freedom starts to run again. I didn't win this case because I'm special. I won because I didn't let someone else write the ending of my story. If you're ever stopped, not by police, but by fear, or doubt, or systems that say you don't belong, remember this: you're allowed to ask questions. You're allowed to take notes. And if you keep walking toward truth, even slowly, even quietly, the law will meet you there." Naomi added, softly, "Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it sounds like silence being broken at last." In a world where power often drowns out principle, the story of Elias and Naomi Monroe reminds us that dignity doesn't require volume, it requires courage. They were not revolutionaries, not activists with megaphones or movements behind them. They were simply two citizens who refused to let fear or silence decide the narrative of their lives. When they were stopped without cause, they didn't lash out, they asked questions. When they were mocked, they took notes. And when the system failed to hold itself accountable, they turned their calm, quiet resolve into a legal challenge that echoed through an entire county. Their story teaches us a powerful truth: you don't have to be loud to be strong. Especially for adults and seniors who may feel overlooked in a fast-paced, youth-driven society, the Monroes prove that life experience is not a burden, it's a tool. A history of integrity, a notebook of facts, and the wisdom to choose law over rage can shift the scales of justice in ways fists never will. They didn't just win a lawsuit, they restored a community's moral compass. Their journey also reminds us of the ripple effect of quiet resistance. Because they stood up, others found their voices. A student became a future lawyer. A mother became a school board leader. A sheriff lost his grip on unchecked authority. And in the aftermath, a town began to ask better questions, not just of its officials, but of itself. We all reach a point in life where we wonder if our voices still matter. The Monroes answered that question not with speeches, but with presence. With preparation. With principle. And they proved that the most powerful legacy isn't left in buildings or bank accounts, but in changed lives and restored faith. So wherever you are in your journey, whether retired or still rising, tired or quietly determined, remember this: you still have something to say. And the world still needs to hear it. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of what quiet courage looks like, or simply made you pause and reflect, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so you won't miss more stories that matter. Your support helps these powerful voices reach farther. And remember, your story might be the one that sparks someone else's change.